Hello there, Lennox Gasper here, and welcome to Assault on Democracy, Never Again. We are here in studio with the PPP's executive member, Mr. Clement Rohee, who will share with us his thoughts and what he remembered going back to March 2nd, 2020. 2020, yes, that is. So, welcome, Mr. Rohee, to this simple discussion and on assault on democracy. And we have to ensure that this never, ever again ever happens. Sir, what are the fundamentals of democracy? Maybe we can start there. You telling us what are the fundamentals of democracy.
Well, I think, first of all, there ought to be free and fair elections. That is to say, that the people must have the right to freely and fairly elect the government of their choice. That is what I would consider to be a fundamental pillar of democracy. Another pillar, in my view, would be good governance. That is to say that the newly elected party, the government, must ensure that the concerns of the people, whether at the parliamentary level or the extra-parliamentary level, are in fulfillment of, first of all, the manifesto that was presented to the people prior to the elections, and also consistent with international treaties and agreements to which the government of the day or the newly elected government is party. In that respect, I refer to the OAS conventions as well as the United Nations conventions, as well as those pertaining to the Commonwealth and even CARICOM, so that all those treaties and obligations translated at a local level and implemented as far as possible by the newly elected government is what I would consider should constitute good governance. The instruments of good governance at the disposal of the government of the day. Now, we have to obviously take into consideration that we don't live in a perfect world, and that while the government is committed to the favorable pursuit of those pillars, fundamental pillars of democracy, to which I've just mentioned, it nevertheless would, in the course of implementation, come up with challenges which it has to overcome, because it was the government itself or the newly elected party itself that made commitments to implement. So whatever the challenges might be, whether they are in the short, medium, and long term, it behoves the newly elected party to pursue those democratic goals consistent with what we understand to be best practices in accordance with the global community of interests and values, of course, within the hemisphere in which we live.
Lovely. I want to take you back to March 2nd, 2020, and maybe you can share with me, take your time and let your thoughts flow, what led to the prolonged declaration of the victory. We know Guyana's system is at least within a 72 hours, there should be an announcement of a party, a victory for either party or contesting parties. Could you take us through that? What do you remember would have happened on election day, March 2nd, 2020?
Well, if we are to talk about the day itself, one has to look at the precedents to that date. In other words, that events that led up to that date, as well as events that flowed from that date. So we have to begin with the no confidence motion, which was a powerful move by the then leader of the opposition, and the parliamentary opposition as a whole to unseat the then Granger administration through a process which is constitutionally allowed for in our constitution and within the parliamentary architecture as well. That is permitted. And that is why at the beginning, notwithstanding the steps that were taken by the Speaker and the clerk at the time, it eventually was proven to be a legitimate step that was taken within the parliamentary ambit. Now, many people or some people might recall that soon after that no confidence motion, the leader of government business, Mr. Nagamutu, called a meeting of his MPs, and in the presence of everyone, they admitted that what took place was legitimate and that they will follow the Constitution measures or steps that has to be taken in light of that matter being legally done within Parliament. But soon after that, within a matter of days, we heard pronouncements to the contrary, contradicting and even questioning what was said and what was done at that meeting. And that created what I would describe as a process that was to be, that could be anticipated, that would flow from there on. Now, they took again the matter to the Parliament, which they had a majority, to test the Speaker's decision. And the Speaker, being a lawyer himself, Dr. Scotland, being a lawyer himself, and being, professionally advised by the clerk, reiterated that nothing is wrong with this decision that was taken. It was quite a legitimate decision. It's in keeping with our parliamentary practice. And so they were rebuffed, having made that attempt to push the Speaker or to pressure the Speaker to maybe say, oh boy, am I in trouble here now? But he didn't. He didn't vacillate. He made it clear that that was his decision. Having not been satisfied with the ruling of the Speaker, they then proceeded to the courts to challenge the matter. And of course, the courts ruled that they cannot interfere with the proceedings within the Parliament, because the Parliament is a constitutional body, a separate arm, so to speak, from the court and the executive. So they didn't succeed there. And they tried all kind of shenanigans in the court situation, legally and otherwise, until they eventually ended up at the appeal court. And that was another historic matter, which I think put Guyana to shame, including many of our school children, who of course was amazed at the way in which that calculation was made, of one number being greater than the other. It was, in my view, it was disgraceful, to say the least. Not only was it surprising, it was most disgraceful. And what added to the disgrace of our country, which everybody knows Guyana produces bright people. Everybody knows that Guyana has a reputation for, as a country I'm talking about, forget the internal politics, that everybody knows Guyana is a country that has stood fast on many principles and such as like. And so when the matter went to the Caribbean Court of Justice, and these distinguished judges read what was the outcome from the appeal court in terms of the numbers, I suppose, one could only see it on television because the whole proceeding was televised, that these judges were kind of flabbergasted as to how this decision was arrived at. And of course, there were other issues that were taken before the Caribbean Court of Justice, before that one. And the Caribbean Court of Justice's ruled in favor of Guyana in terms, first of all, of the selection of the chairman of GECOM. Remember, there was a process where the leader of the opposition, Bar Jagdeo, had to submit names that were unacceptable. That were not unacceptable to the president. And he did that about 4 or 5 times, probably 6 times, of names of very distinguished Guyanese who had nothing to do with, political parties. And the then president rejected every single one of those names. I mean, to me, as a Guyanese looking on at what was happening at that time and knowing the names, I think I would have felt the same way as an individual, clean as a whistle, would have felt if my name was rejected by the president when there was nothing against me. Nothing at all. So, if my name was rejected by the president to be chairman of GECOM, then if I'm to apply for a job somewhere else, would that be a stain against me? I mean, every professional takes good care of their local standard in the community, in the country which they serve, or in the country where they live. And they always want to make sure that the curriculum vitae is beyond reproach. So, to reject people like that, a strictly professional person would, of course, feel not very comfortable about that. But be that as it may, what he did was to throw all those people under the bus and handpicked, without consulting with the leader of the opposition or anyone else, a name which he was comfortable with. It was man Justice Patterson, and put him as a member, as the chairman of GECOM. Now, obviously, you have a situation there where you have 3 representatives from the PNC, a chairman handpicked by the president. Of course, we would know where he stands, and 3 representatives from the PPP. So we know where the majority, how the majority would go on crucial, critical issues. And that was another complication in the process. But we had to get that individual out of that position because it was done unconstitutionally and it was not done in accordance with what was done before, or what the law called for, what the Constitution calls for. And the CCJ on that matter made a decision that Patterson must vacate his seat. Then followed a consultation soon after, and former judge Claudette Singh's name came up, and Dr. Jagdeo agreed to that name because that name came from the then government, that name came from Granger. It was not our nominee, it came from Granger. So that name was accepted, she was sworn in, and then you had another interesting situation at GECOM where you have an independent chairman not belonging to any political party, 3 from PPP and 3 from PNC. So we were hopeful that at least at the GECOM level, we wouldn't have that kind of conundrum baffling situation like we had with Patterson. So you had several moving parts at the same time taking place. You had the political parties, on the hustings outside, so to speak. You had GECOM, a critical link in the chain. You had the executive also doing what they had to do to stymie the process, throw obstacles in the way. And you had, of course, the courts. And there's one other, or I should say 2 others, that were playing a very important role in that process, in that period. What you call electoral periodization, because you have to also analyze that process from a historical point of view and put it in periods. So in that period, you had two players that, in my view, were playing a critical role, and that the press, the media, and civil society. So there were all these moving parts, interlocking and interchanging with each other during that period of time. And they were all contributing to the subject which you started out with about what is democracy, or what does it stand for. So the internal dynamics vis-a-vis the politics was active, was maturing, fomenting, so to speak. The civil society was playing their positive role in trying to push the process in a democratic way, or democratic solution. The press, the watchdog, so to speak, was raising questions that were quite legitimate and aimed also at ensuring that the democratic process would have been, fulfilled.
So in all this, what, and I love the fact that you would have pulled all the various pieces together to give the explanation, but what led to the riotous display there preceding the day?
Good. Well, after the date was announced for the elections, and people went to the polls. Everybody, it was very peaceful. There was no incident on polling day. The question of the counting threw up some larger issues and challengeable issues. And then when it came now, the central counting place was at the Hatchman's building at Brickdam and at Hatfield and Brickdam, or somewhere around that area.
Yeah.
So when the large envelopes were brought by the returning officers, the poll clerks and their assistants there, and all the political parties, including the international observers, who, by the way, were fully involved, not involved in the election, involved in terms of observing what was going on. The counting of the votes was proceeding well for the first few hours. And then, owing to the alertness of our counting agents, or the counting agents of the PPPC, as well as some observers, they noticed that the way in which the counts were taking place was changing. And the sudden appearance of some kind of what is known as a spreadsheet was presented instead of the process of counting taking place. That was substituted by the introduction of a spreadsheet with tabulations already done, without the inputs of the counting agents, opposition counting agents. Now, I don't know about the government counting agents, whether they were in the know and were told that what is going to happen, and therefore they didn't make any noise. But the furor began with the introduction of this spreadsheet with data that had no relationship whatsoever to what was taking place, while the opposition counting agents was keeping an eye or were present on what was taking place. And that's where the big brouhaha, the big confusion started. I would say fight back, to win back the democratization of the vote counting in the presence of the political parties, because that is how the representation of the People's Act expected to take place. You see? So once that was jettisoned unilaterally by those who had a vested interest to ensure that they don't lose the elections, then obviously the counting agents who was most observant realized that something had gone wrong, and that's why we had this big, want of a better word, explosion
Okay.
at the Ashman's building.
Right, and so we know and always shown on television as to what went on at Ashman's building, and then we've had 5 months of prolonged back and forth court proceedings and all of that before actually the announcement of the new government.
Well,
and the
what
establishment.
you had after that was an interregnum, but with the PPP still actually pursuing the matter, and there was a kind of a, I'm trying to find the right word, a kind of a hesitation on the part of GECOM to actually pronounce on what was happening, you see. Because remember that Ashman's process is a GECOM process. So once that process is aborted, that Ashman incident is where the GECOM is supposed to be in control of. So if GECOM had lost control of that process, and it had now blew up in everybody's faces, then the question was what follows after.
Okay.
Because there's no results.
Right. I'm trying to fast forward, right?
Yeah, but
Because time
don't
is
miss out
coming.
this
Go
important
ahead.
one. Let me mention this quickly. Remember, there was a period of negotiations between CARICOM
Yes.
and the government.
Yes.
Granger was contacted by CARICOM leaders to try to sort out this problem. And then it moved a step further when opposition leader Mr. Jagdew was involved in agreeing to a process, a recount process, first some and then all of the regions. And then remember the recounting that took place at the Arthur Chung Convention Center, and that took a long time. And then eventually we saw what the result
Beautiful.
was.
So explain to us the measures taken after the new government that was created took office. Explain to us what measures were put in place to prevent any electoral tampering for future elections.
Well, the first thing that that happened was the president was sworn in, the vice president, and the Minister of Legal Affairs and Attorney General, and Gail Teixeira, Minister of Governance and Parliamentary Affairs. Those are 4 critical portfolios that were dealt with, and they all had to do with what the government will do thereafter. You see, so the legal matters had to be attended to urgently by the Attorney General. The parliamentary matters had to be attended to urgently by the minister, and of course the total governance issue, president and to some extent the vice president. And the first thing they were committed to was implementation of what they considered to be the priority areas in their manifesto, because that's what it took to the people to win the support of the electorate. Having won the support of the electorate, now it's a question of implementation. And so they're guided now by their manifesto to implement the key elements of that manifesto. And the question was also a budget. A budget had to be settled in order to be able to spend money on the programs. And therefore, I think things like housing, infrastructure, health, education, the social sector has always been a major pillar of government budgets, and then the security sector as well. So in accordance with that vision, that's how the government began to move with respect to the implementation of priority areas vis-a-vis the manifesto.
Lovely. What is the role of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry as in government, actually enforcing and safeguarding democracy? How do you see that?
Well,
in a role?
that comes back to the question you originally posed just now, which is immediate steps. That is one of the things that the president had committed to, the setting up of this COI. That took a while, but it eventually was established. It has finished its work. Many people went before to give evidence. Some refused to give evidence. But the fact of the matter is, that's now, in a sense, behind us. But we are now awaiting the report. The President is awaiting the report of that Commission of Inquiry, which at some point in time, I suppose, will be made public. So that that's one promise that came out as a result of all the confusion is not the right word, all the issues that came out of the last election that people want to hear about, and people want to ensure that this never happens again. And perhaps, and then of course you had the laws that were passed in the Parliament recently by, laid in the House by the Attorney General to penalize electoral officials who were found guilty to be involved in any illegal act in the execution of their duties. So there are certain safeguards that are in place now, but that doesn't mean to say that it's perfect. You know, we always have to be vigilant, we have to be alert, because right now in preparing for local government elections, a lot of issues have come up, you know, that we have to deal with. We have to deal with, and issues will come that we will have to deal with. So it's no walk in the park or no Sunday morning walk, as you put it. It's always a question of being vigilant, being alert, and ensuring, according to your team, that this doesn't happen again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clement Rohee, and former Minister of Home Affairs and Central Exec member of the People's Progressive Party. Thank you for taking the time out to share with us. And you've been watching the Assault on Democracy, Never Again. I've been your host, Lennox Gasper. Thank you for watching.